Welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is part 4 of a 4-part educational series based on the 2021 Consumer Research Study. This important study has successfully aided the U.S. cycling industry in identifying how and why different groups of cyclists are purchasing cycling equipment. The major study looked at cyclists drawn to the activity post-COVID pandemic, as well as the longstanding cyclists across the country. And it's an essential tool that the industry can now use to plan for the future and generate long-term sustainable growth. The report is available on the NBDA website in both brand and retailer versions. And if you have not already purchased a copy of this report, I strongly urge you to consider. I'm joined here today by Rochelle Scouten, NBDA Development Director, and also our panel members, both of who worked alongside the NBDA as a team to design and execute this project, and again, have volunteered their time today to lend insight, answering your direct questions in today's conversation. I want to give a warm welcome to Keith Storey.
Hi.
Storey, thank you for joining us, Keith. He is the president of Sports Marketing Surveys. And we also have Jay Townley, who's resident futurist at Human Powered Solutions, who many of you know as well. Thank you, Jay.
Glad to be here.
So this is a roundtable event. The idea is that we have both Keith and Jay here to answer any questions you may have on the research. We ask you to place those questions into the chat function at any time as we go along, and I will ask them to our guest experts. Keith and Jay are here to ensure that everyone has a chance to ask any questions around the research. I know there's been a lot of questions out there, and we really want to take this time to make sure we answer them as completely as possible. So this information is firsthand direct data from consumers on past and future purchase intent. So without further ado, let me get into it. Sports Marketing Surveys is a research agency with a global reach. They have 35 years experience. They provide insight and strategic recommendations to support some of the biggest brands, retailers, events, venues, federations around the globe in order to grow businesses and get closer to people. So with that, the NBDA reached out and we obtained Keith and his services and to help us execute this report. So before we dive into the questions, Keith, just a little bit about behind the mythology of the study.
Sure, yeah, so the study was 2,500 online interviews with adult cyclists, so remember adult cyclists, and to qualify as a cyclist, you had to have cycled outdoors or on a regular bike or an e-bike at least once in the last 12 months. And what we did to create the sample was we set quotas based on our profile of all cyclists from the PAC study. So the PAC study is the Physical Activity Council, and that's there are various partners, including People for Bikes and Outdoor Foundation, people like that. So it's really the sort of standard measure of sports participation in the US, and that is 18,000 interviews a year, and that's very tightly controlled in terms of quotas. So we took the cyclist profile from that in terms of age, gender, income, and region, and set quotas to complete those 2,500 online interviews. Each interview, I think, was about 60 or 70 questions, so there's an awful lot of data in there. And yeah, I think we're very pleased with the way it turned out. There's a lot of comfort points in terms of, spend by channel, spend by frequency, spend by type of cyclist, things like that. So I think it worked out really well, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions on the methodology. I suppose one thing to also point out would be we take quality control very seriously. So Danielle, who's also on the call somewhere, she goes through every single interview, and we check things like open-ended, we check consistency between one response and another. So at that point, yeah, we just, if we're not happy with that respondent, we just delete them. As do the survey provider, the sample provider. They do a lot of digital fingerprinting, they do a lot of digital checks in terms of checking that the browser time zone matches the time zone of the place they're supposed to be at, things like that, just to do some additional quality control on the interviews.
Thank you, Keith. It's such an intense process. I had not had experience with data research like this in the past, and working with you and your team, it gave me a better understanding of all the time and effort that goes into it. So as Keith mentioned, if there's any questions just around the survey and the way that it was executed, please put those into the chat. Over to Jay. Jay has hosted 3 webinars with us to date on the data, directly educating retailers on how best to use the data. And just insight forward. Jay, we have fielded a couple questions that I want to bring up right now and just put right on the table, if you don't mind, just to throw you off with this one. We had a couple questions from retailers who had attended the webinars in the past, or even who have purchased the report, asking about the large number of responses indicating both acoustic and e-bike BMX growth. Can you speak to that, Jay?
I'll do my best, Heather. It's the last week I've been in a dialogue with several NBDA members about this, and dealers have been extremely helpful because there's no question about acoustic BMX bicycles. Quite frankly, they've been around in an important category for decades. And some younger riders in the survey, 18 to 21 in particular, are still riding their BMX bikes. And I've had some personal experience with that I won't bore you with here, but you know, we're very familiar with the acoustic side. What bike shops are confirming, and they're helping us understand, is consumer perception. A significant percentage of adult cyclists and e-bike cyclists responding to the research survey essentially were telling us that their next e-bike and what they perceive, now perception is important here, and clearly identify as a BMX e-bike. What bike shops are helping us understand, and particularly in the past week, is something unusual did happen during the first 2 years of the pandemic. And for everybody on the call, specifically, what happened over the last 2 years, 2020, 2021, during this surge was the emergence of what has been hitherto a literally unknown segment of primarily direct-to-consumer D2C e-bikes, and in the e-bike business. And we're estimating now that that segment could be 200 to 250,000 units, and I've opined that to the dealers that we're working with. For clarification, what we're talking about here are category 2 and category 3 electric assist bicycles as defined. And particularly, I want to call out here and shout out to Ken Bradford from Ken's Bike, Ski, and Board in Davis, California, who I've had the pleasure of actually visiting in past years. Particularly, I want to thank Ken for the help he's been giving in being patient and going through long discussions via email on the topic. What our investigations, helped by the several dealers involved, particularly Keith, or Ken, I'm sorry, what the investigations have shown and what we found is the characteristics of the e-bike BMX segment. We've staked it out, pretty well understand it, have pictures of it. And the overall agreement we've found with everybody that we've talked to, including Keith, is that we don't know what to call it. We've got to call it something better than what's been identified. But right now, consumers have said, look, we're going to buy an electric BMX. And effectively what we've got here is a segment, an important segment with really large quantity. And we're going to have to take a look going forward at how we can get both those brands. And I'm happy to say you've actually got one of the brands as an associate member of the NBDA, Juiced Bikes. Yep. But also we need to look at Super 73, Rad. I'm not identifying any of these as potentials, but they all contributed. And what we've had in the last week is talk to enough dealers that have said, yeah, yep, we know what you mean, because they're coming in for repair. We've also found some dealers around the country that actually have contracts with the B-lines of this world, with the service providers, dealers that have contracts to actually assemble the direct-to-consumer bikes, and they're being delivered. So there's a world here that we need to uncover and work at. But the key is, Keith's right. This survey talked to consumers, and the consumer perceptions are accurate. And those perceptions in all cases can be validated. In some cases, it doesn't match up to the exact perception that the bike shop people have, me included. But these are the consumer perceptions of bicycles and bicycling, acoustic bikes and e-bikes. Fascinating stuff, but I'm happy to report that in the past week, a lot of clarity has been brought to this question of the electric BMX.
Yeah, thank you, Jay, for that very thorough answer. And it is through our members reaching out to us and saying, hey, what is this that allows us to dive deeper into it and get more clarity on the subject. So yeah, again, thanks to Ken and the other retailers who have reached out. And yeah, when I saw those results at first, I myself was very startled to see BMX on top. But when we think about it this way, and just yesterday looking at another e-bike brand that has 20-inch wheels, consumer perception. Keith, anything to add on what Jay just went into there?
Yeah, no, I think that's very well explained. I think, but also the typically there is an explanation, and when something like that comes up, once we dig into the data, and if we exclude current BMX riders, as Jay says, there are BMX riders in that survey. When we exclude those, then the numbers of people that are going to buy an e-bike drops right down, and it's sort of more in line with road bikes and mountain bikes. And I think also, it's good guidance for the study in future to come up with a different category. Don't just put BMX, road, cargo, bike, cyclocross. So we had a pretty comprehensive list that they could pick from, but there wasn't, anything that necessarily defined what the consumer was thinking about when they were going to buy their next e-bike.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know we have some retailers who have just joined us. So this is a retail roundtable. And as we just discovered, learning from each other does give us a better outcome. So any questions, any thoughts you have, use the chat function, keep that chat function going, and I'll ask our experts while they're here. And I guess, Keith, let's stick with you for a second. As you were going through the results, I know you've done many reports. You've been in the data collection industry for a long time. Anything about the results that really stood out to you?
Yeah, that's why I've got very gray hair.
I'm sorry, Keith.
Yeah, so I mean, I've got a number of things that I think jumped out. And I think the first thing was really the percentage of cyclists that were new in the last 2 years or even returning in the last 2 years. When we're looking at other sports, we sort of typically call that like the leaky bucket. And if we continually got that number of new cyclists in each year, cycling would be just much, much bigger than it is. And typically, if we look at last year, we're just about to release our new participation numbers on cycling. And it'll show that cycling has dropped back a little bit, but not back to where it was in 2019. But it sort of got me thinking about, cycling doesn't have a recruitment issue. And I think Jay refers to this in the NBDA report. It's more of a retention issue. If you think of the number of people that are coming in, I mean, last year probably we had about 20 million new and returning, but we also lost about 17 million. So it's all about retention. And when we're talking to other sports like tennis or golf or any of the team sports, it's retaining people in that sport that's just all important. And there's lots of things that people say. There's one sort of clue from the study was what's preventing you from cycling more often, and the top 5 were like weather, work, traffic, family commitments, and roads are too dangerous. So, that's a pretty good clue as to, as people start going back to work more, they start commuting more, that's going to impact a little bit in terms of the number of cyclists. And I think cycling in common with a lot of other sports has the difficulty there aren't many touch points as an industry to retain these people. So tennis has got exactly the same problem with all the people that play on tennis on a public court. They haven't got anything where they can email them and market to those people. So it's really difficult to have an ongoing communication. And obviously our communication with cyclists is primarily through the independent bike dealers and the direct-to-consumer brands. So they have the relationship and they have the touch point. So I think that's really important for the industry to take on board and realize, we've got to keep these people in the industry in cycling. So that was the first one.
Yeah, I'm so happy you brought that up though, Keith. It's like seeing that there's a slide in the report. Is there anything preventing you from participating in cycling more often, as you're referring to, weather, work commitments, traffic, family, dangerous roads, no one to say. We can take that information and it's like, okay, here's what we need to do. Like a very, fantastic data to have and to learn firsthand. I love that you called that one out.
So the second one was really the strength of the Ibd channel. And, obviously there's direct to consumer brands, lots of bigger brands are going online. So there is that sort of pressure, but 32% of the most recent purchases were from local bike shops. And I think that was really interesting. And obviously there are differences. So the more fanatical cyclists you are, the more you call yourself a fanatic, the more likely you are to go to an independent bike dealer. And IBD buyers tend to be more male, slightly older, more affluent, tend to be road and mountain bike specific. But it's just interesting that it came out so strongly. And I think it's, we also had questions in there about what the strengths were. So product knowledge and things like that. So I think the independent bike dealer channel came out really pretty well from the study.
Yeah, I would agree.
So the only other thing I would comment on, can I just share my screen?
I think so. Yep, you should be able to.
Was just the segmentation analysis we did. So this can just be from current slide. Hopefully we can see that. Excellent. So this is where we put in some attitudinal data, behavior data, and demographic data. And it's my magic pen out. So it's based on this idea called crossing the chasm, Moore's crossing the chasm. So the first two groups here tend to be the early adopters and the early majority. But the interesting thing with this, and this was fascinating to me, our first group here, which tends to be all about performance, technology, customization, they're spending 4 times the amount of the next group. So this is really the lifeblood of the IBD channel. As probably this is, they're more likely to commute, and you start messaging different things for this particular group. So we're talking about stress relief, exercise, speed and excitement. And then once you get past this, you can see there's a huge drop off in spend from $1,000 to $400, $500. We get some really interesting groups as well. So this is the new cyclists. They're a lot younger, they're 26, but they're into cycling for different reasons. It's about weight loss. It's about low impact workout, being part of a group. And then there's this whole big group. So this is about 30% of all cyclists is the family cyclists. And to get to these people, again, you've got to start talking about different things to market to them and through different channels, maybe kids TV, online family websites. But it's about getting out family exercise as a group, getting out in nature and sightseeing. And then, of course, because I probably fall into this last group, the senior exercise and fitness, when I was discussing this group with Jay, we didn't want to call it the thrifty 60s, but it's basically the oldest group. And they do go to independent bike dealers, but they don't like to spend any money. And it's $305 is like their average cycling spend. So again, different messages here. It's all about comfort, smooth ride, fitness. So I just thought that the way these segments turned out was just really interesting. I think those are very usable in terms of looking at where your business currently is as a retailer. Is it primarily just in these two? Or do you have to start thinking about some different messages going into these other 3 groups?
Super impactful to have you share your screen here and show this to us. And I've looked at the report. I've been through it several times myself, and noticing that average cycling spend so much of a higher percentage, higher price there to the enthusiasts and early adapters is quite astonishing every time I see that. Jay, is there anything that stood out to you in the report? I know this is your third time or fourth time now talking about the report, but I feel like if you're like me, every time you look through it, something pops out again at you. So
yeah, it does. I've said this before internally to you guys, but I don't know if it's got a lot of exposure outside, but this is the first really in-depth cycling consumer research that's been done since 2014. And a lot has happened. And as we described with the electric BMX, during the COVID, during the pandemic, the 2020, 2021 period that we measured and talked to consumers about, we've had changes. What Keith mentioned this, but one of the big things that stuck out in my mind was the number of new cyclists, and I'm looking at the chart, 27.7% or 27% of all of the adult cyclists in the survey started cycling during the pandemic. I mean, to me, that's huge, because you couple that with 20.7% that returned. They were cyclists that had quit, had walked away from bicycling and came back. That's almost 50% of all of the cyclists, the adult cyclists in the United States during the pandemic, the last 2 years, were either new or returning. So as Keith said, one of the things we emphasized in the NBDA dealer report is retention. And those clusters become extremely important because, yeah, you've got the two of them that are the higher spend for the bike shop, but you've got three groups that you need to look at from the standpoint of reaching out to. And I think probably the best example is what we found with the eBMX, with the electric, what is identified and perceived as the BMX rider. Now that's a genre. It's a class or type of e-bike product. It's mostly D2C, but it is a block that needs to be looked at from the standpoint of bike shops competing for that business. Because Keith's correct. I mean, what we're going to see in the participation data, we've already seen in the data you've looked at, Heather, with your P2 groups and with the dealers we've talked to, is, and this shows up in the research, in 2020, consumers told us that a higher percentage, 60, 70%, depending on the category, purchased a new bike in 2020. Well, only 30 to 39% purchased a new bike in 2021. Clearly the new bike purchases went down. Keep in mind, this is participation, it's riders. So they don't have to buy in the same year, but we started to see what we're experiencing right now. You'll find it readily in talking to retailers, is we're waiting to see what spring will hold because inventory is building and consumer footfalls in stores are down. The direct to consumer people are seeing the same thing. So I think that this is extremely important data. And I'll leave you with one other thing that I found just astounding, and that is the e-bike category, specifically, when did they start riding? And forgive me, because I've got to look at the detail here, but 34% of all e-bike riders in the last 2 years were brand new to cycling, had never cycled before in their lives, which is huge. And then the follow on to that is 36.9% return to cycling. Now, they may have been e-bike riders, they may not, but they returned to cycling, bought an e-bike. That's just over 50% of all the e-bike riders, adult riders in the United States, either returning or new. And so our job here is retention, and this goes to why would I want to reach out to the people riding the electric e-bike? Well, you're going to need to look at, as a specialty bike retailer, how you bring them into your family, how you bring them into your community. So this is all contained in the report. It's just as you said, Heather, every time I look at it, and I look at it frequently, I see something new. It's that massive and that big. And we tried to take the retailer version that you've published, and it's about 60 pages, but we tried to boil it down. Keith has just had a chance to take a look at it. I just got it to him, but it's boil it down and do the analysis for them and make it easier for a retailer to look at what they need to make actionable in their business and their tactical planning.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. And I love what you're pulling out. And, it is true. We have the brand report, 150 pages plus, and the information in that is just so intense. And I'm realizing a lot of the retailers on the call today have just seen the retailer report, which, as you noted, we did boil it down to make it easy to digest. But there's a lot of information in that brand report. And I have some questions coming across that are direct to me through the chat that I want to pull out. And for the retailers who have just joined us, any questions you have on the data, on maybe any data that you haven't seen, just questions in general, anything can go right now, just throw them into the chat and we will ask our experts. So this question came over, Keith and Jay, in the chat privately to me about the brand recognition. And the question was, did we ask about bike brand purchases? And what did we learn from that?
Yeah, we did. I mean, I think the interesting thing was, and again, you've got to be careful with perception, because the further you go back, people tend to forget what brand it was. And we asked what the brand of the most recent purchase was. So when we hone into, purchases in the last 12 months, we get a much more sort of accurate picture of what the brand looked like. But it was really interesting, again, going back to those 5 segments, is the first one, the enthusiasts, early adopters, they're all about performance brands. So those really are in the sweet spot for independent bike dealers. The further down you get into the more of the chain sporting goods brands, the mass merchant brands, and the online brands. So it's, I think that, yeah, we certainly asked it. I think it came out pretty well. We're working with some of the brands who bought the report in terms of doing a specific run of cross tabulations for them to help them through a bit more.
Yeah, the brand study is very complete down into the component and the accessory standpoint. I chuckled because one of my takeaways is, and we've discussed this, all 3 of us have talked about this. The American consumer, if you're not an enthusiast cyclist, you have very little idea of brand. And remember, this is all cyclists. This covers every cyclist from A to Z, direct consumer. They bought the bike from Walmart, Target, or a bike shop. So the enthusiasts who you can define, they're the ones that understand brand, the Tour de France, the activities and the events. But you get to the bulk of adult cyclists in this country, and the one thing that you'll find in the brand study that'll stick out, that I don't think giving away a secret here, is the highest unaided brand awareness in the United States among all consumers is Schwinn. And that gives you an idea of how the American public thinks about brands. It's a legacy brand. Mm-hmm. And it simply shows you that the other key to this, I think, Heather, you'll agree with this. The other thing this shows is that for a bike shop, their brand is the most important thing for the consumer. The bike shop brand, and making sure that dealers don't subordinate their brand to the product brands. I know you were about to say, I cut you off. I'm sorry, yeah. I shouldn't do that.
No. I shouldn't cut you off, but I was just, how my brain works. I was thinking about the brand Schwinn, and I recall we did ask about used bikes, if they purchased new or used. Did the report give us any indication, Keith or Jay, that what the future purchase intent is, used versus new, just for retailers who are considering offering used? And what's some of that feedback? I don't recall that.
Yes, it is. And it's not one of the 800,000 pieces of data that I've got on the top of my head, but we did ask it.
We did ask, and what you'll see is the used bikes held up well, even used e-bikes held up well, but it tends to be under 6% from the standpoint, and that fits the market. That's now, as consumers think about it. quite frankly, as we get into different types of economies, then the used bike goes up and down. But the general takeaway from the data was that right now about 5 to 5.5%, a little larger for one of the other product categories, but it didn't get larger than 6% plan to buy a used bike.
It's good information to know. I mean, overall, the question I'm hearing every day is people want this magic ball right into the future. So will the bike boom continue? I mean, overarching like feedback based on this report with the future buy intent, I think it was what the most cyclists plan to buy a new bike within the next 2 years, correct? So that's pretty good news, right?
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful with consumers' future purchase intent. But I think what we're finding, and the participation will bear this out when we release it, is really yes, people have started to travel again. People have started to go back to work, but we've still got a lot of people that are working hybrid. So they're working at home part of the time and the office part of the time. So they still have that opportunity. So the so-called like doorstep sports like running and cycling, walking for fitness, those will still, people who've developed that habit during COVID or the pandemic, I think a good percentage are going to keep going. So I don't think it's any sort of earth-shattering finding, but I think it will go back a little bit, but we won't go back to where we were in 2019.
Yeah,
I agree.
So I'm thinking about all of the retailers who are asking me about inventory management, strategic planning. And I know the nice file you just showed us that really told us, 29% or 30% is that family that maybe will spend around $500. For someone trying to do their purchasing as far as e-bikes, any indicators on what the most popular range of MSRP would be that the consumers are looking for e-bike purchasing in the next future purchase intent?
You want me to jump in?
Yeah.
I know I'm throwing out specific things. I don't know if that's okay, but I am getting private.
Yeah.
Feel free, everyone's texting me privately, but feel free to throw it your
what we're seeing, what the data indicated was mid to lower priced e-bikes. There seemed to be more interest in the below $2,000 product as opposed to the $5,000 product. But again, you've got to be careful because this data will show you, well, here's the other piece to throw out here as a factoid. The average household income for an e-bike rider was over $100,000. It was aggressive. It was extremely high, which means it's got some room to grow as a blanket around the rest of the population. But it also says that the e-bike rider at those household incomes is going to be reacting differently to prices, to inflation, as an example. But overall, the tendency, I think Keith is agreeing, the tendency that we saw in the pricing for e-bikes was the next one is going to be in the mid to lower side of the e-bike pricing spectrum as opposed to the upper side.
Yeah, I think that's right. And just looking at the difference between those 5 segments again, I just pulled that up. So whereas our high spending enthusiast group, they're over 2,000, but you go down to the diverse new cyclists and the family cyclists, they're more like 1,000. In fact, the diverse new somewhat less than 1,000, which I think it's difficult to buy an e-bike under 1,000, but then I think this is what they were saying they would be interested in buying it for.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's really important to know as we're making our planning forward. Thinking what else here, I'm going back to future purchase intent and very pleased to see the independent bicycle retailer coming out on top. Was there any indications on why someone might choose the independent retailer, like why they came out on top? Or what would, what were, just to give us an idea of what maybe we could focus on, what our strengths are as far as consumers' perception of the local bike shop?
Yeah, it was, product knowledge, fast delivery, service, all the sort of things that, you typically think of as an independent bike dealer. I could pull it up.
Yeah, and that's product knowledge is the key.
Mhm.
The caution in the retailer report was just be aware not all consumers want that core dump of your knowledge. You know, there's some consumers you'll know, but you have to be a skilled salesperson and ask questions and respond accordingly. However, you've got the answers. You know more than the public, and in most cases, the enthusiasts think they know about products. But you know, the internet is a great leveler of knowledge. Online, consumers, I mentioned this to you the other day, Heather, that one of the things that comes out of the research, but generally that we've found in the data of consumer preference is a very high percentage of consumers will do their research online now. Coming out of the pandemic, a good percentage will go to a brick and mortar to buy based on that research, but their shopping, in effect, will be more electronic than it's ever been before. So what they're going to do is the consumer wants the knowledge. They're going to come into the shops armed with their version, their perception of knowledge. And the specialty retailer and their staff have to become more skilled at asking questions and working around that knowledge, not poo-pooing it or pushing it down or disrespecting, but recognizing it and being skilled enough to work around what the consumer perceives as what they've learned, and they've learned online about our products.
Yeah, Jay, do you think, a question to Jay, that people's perception of the local bike shop has changed? I seem to think, 10, 15 years ago, they were pretty intimidating places to go into. Now my local bike shops are great. They're just friendly. They've got, male and females as the attendants, and they don't throw the sort of technical chat at you straight away as you go in. If you ask for it, you'll get plenty of it. But yeah, they just seem like a friendlier place to go in than they might have been maybe 10 years ago.
They are. I think they are much more, they're softer. Right. They're much more consumer friendly. I think in these times, they simply have to get softer. I call it sticky, and adopt the Panera or the Starbucks approach of become third place. You know, that whole philosophy of marketing is there's home, there's work, and there's the place you want to be when you're not at the other two. And that's the third place philosophy built into a couple of large brands. Bike shops, I do believe in the future, have to become more friendly than they've become. And the evidentiary material is in the demographics of the study.
Yeah.
And sorry, and those retailers that, crank and grind and the sort of bike/coffee shop, how are those guys getting on?
I think better. Heather's probably got a better feel for that, but my sense is that the Heritage General Stores, which is a bike shop in Chicago, are doing well in these times and will do well going forward because they've totally embraced being sticky, the whole idea of third place philosophies in their marketing. And so they've created a reason for consumers to come in more often, which is part of what that whole philosophy is about. Don't wait till you need a tube or wait till your bike needs repair. Provide the means and the enticement for the consumer to come in more often, more frequently. And we can get into a whole discussion about that. But to answer your question directly, yes, I think bike shops have become more friendly. I think the demographics of the study show that they have to become more friendly because now they're competing with online that was, at a certain level, about 20% folks were on online pre-COVID, and that's just doubled. It's over 40% of consumers will shop online. So there's all sorts of things that dealers have to do around that.
Yeah, these are great questions. And we had some great questions coming into the chat as well. Adam has asked a really important question about the sharing of information between IBDs and suppliers in order to strengthen the long-term, like true IBD, if we will, so we don't go to, online or full company stores. And, Adam, such a great question. And this research really points to just how critical communication is. This research points to me, what I read from this was that the cyclist prefers the IBD. The cyclist will choose the IBD because of the relationship, the knowledge, the expertise, supporting your local community. And you are an integral role as a shop owner, shop staff member in letting the suppliers and brands know what you need in order to stay in business. So we have to open up those communication walls as much as we can. I don't know, Keith or Jay, would you add anything there?
No, I think that's certainly the way forward. And I think, we do retail audits in a number of sports. We don't currently do cycling in this country, we do cycling in the UK. But the way that is all going is, it's share so that the brands can see inventory and they can see sales down to a store level. So I think things are certainly heading that way.
Yeah, I agree. And the sharing of information, I think, is critical. I'll be, well, again, it's me, but my general perception is that the whole of the community, the supply side, does not share as much as it should or could with dealers. And if there is a more open approach, the B Corp or the new view of sharing information and working together can permeate through our industry, it'll be extremely beneficial to everybody. But I do think there needs to be more communication from top to down to the bottom.
And if we take our specialty surfscape retail audit that we do here in the States, we have a product part of that called Project United. And originally, in the genesis of it, we were almost going to call it vendor managed inventory, but we didn't want to call it that. So we called it Project United because both sides benefit. And we've got data that shows, yeah, it benefits the brand, but it also benefits the retailer. So it's just that next step. They can be better in touch with what you've been selling, better in touch with what you need, what you're selling and what you're not selling, also just as important. So
did we, thinking about how we're embracing the new cyclists, encouraging them forward, and now some of our retailers are ending up with inventory maybe that's piling up, that's not the right SKU, and maybe looking to start marketing again, actually, as business maybe is slowing down. I know we asked about social media, say Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter. Is any feedback indicating where consumers are most likely to go? So what feeds might be best to market on?
I think every conceivable possible place you can, it's because if you take my, adult daughters, anything to go by is there on everything all the time. So, it's only older people like me that are only on Facebook. But yeah, I think as much as you can get, and that's where a really good social media marketing agency that's worked with bike retailers or other retailers, I think is really important, because they'll be able to steer you in the right direction on all of that.
Yep. And the study does have for each of the product segments, the big ones, there is a whole slide that is devoted to that. We didn't translate all of that into the dealer study, but we do comment on it in a number of pieces in the dealer report. It's bandwidth for specialty bike retailers. The answer to your question is, how much social media. I agree with Keith, everything you can get on. However, bike shops don't have the bandwidth to do it right. You can be on the social media, but if you're not engaging, if you're not answering on a regular basis, if you're not there for the consumer or for the participants, then they walk away from you. It means nothing to them. So therefore it's not worth being there. So if you're going to be on social media, go on the social media where you can devote staff or your own time to make sure that you're active. And that will be as important to you as having 6 different social media sites that you're on, having 2 that you're really active on and you're attracting the audience, and more importantly, that you're responding to and you've got a community building is going to be just as important to you. So to me, it's a bandwidth issue. It's what does the dealer and staff have, does the staff have bandwidth for?
I think that's right. And if a number of the running retailers that supply data to our running retail audit, and I can't remember the name of the agency, but there is one that's very successful in the running industry. They say it absolutely pays for itself and is a great return on investment for them to use a social media agency. And they can measure it, you know, they measure the effectiveness, whereas it's not just you putting videos here and there, and you know, you actually got a really good measurement of what's going out.
Yeah,
I was really surprised to see the shocking number of people who do visit YouTube. I knew it was large, but from this report, it really indicated to me that if you're not on YouTube as a retailer and educating, using it as an education tool, you know, you could be missing something there. So
well, and that's where, you know, going back to the e-bike D2C, that's where a great deal, the product reviews are posted there daily. And they're 12-minute videos, 15-minute videos, and they're inclusive. You know, it's the reviewer riding the bike and filming that process. And when they talk about features, they're filming the features, and what they're saying. Forgive me for this, but a friend of mine used to say, it's from your lips to God's ear. You know, it's the reviewer becomes the authority, and the perception then is what the reviewer says, and that's what the consumer is hearing. And it's got all the dynamics going with it. So you're absolutely correct, Heather.
any other questions for our guests? Any other specific questions? You know, just as we're looking for more questions to come in here, something that really struck out to me was when we asked, particularly road cyclists, how do they get their bike serviced? Where do they take it for services? And staggering, about 47% take it to the local bike shop, and then about 40% do it themselves. Indicative to me that we have an opportunity there to capture those do-it-myselfers with home repair items, or maybe offering up a work stand in our shop if able for a fee to work in the store. Just things I was thinking as I looked over the research, just thinking of where we could make that beneficial to our store moving forward. Jay, anything else that you noticed that, you know, maybe popped out to you recently that we haven't already shared in the previous 3 webinars that was a takeaway for you, for retailers on the call?
Well, you hit a good one on the service. And I think, you know, part of what we're putting in the advice in the dealer report is clinics and teaching tools. Get them in the store. And again, this idea of get them in the retail store for anything in order to be exposed to your retail environment, and then in turn to your merchandise. I mean, it boils down to that. So clinics, service clinics, bring them in to teach them. I know a lot of dealers object to this. You know, they'll say, I'm not going to teach them how to fix a bike. Well, they're fixing it anyway.
They're doing it.
They're getting, yeah, they're learning off the internet. They're getting the information they need off of YouTube. So why not get them in your store? And you're right. You could sell them a repair stand. You can sell them tools. You can sell them service equipment. You can sell them lubes. It's a chance to look at your accessories. Turn it into an opportunity, but get them in the store. So teaching them to repair a bike is not the worst thing in the world, because if they screw it up, they're going to have to come to you to get it fixed anyway.
Yeah, I feel like we forget too often because we're in the role day in and day out. But I remember one time I was able to go, actually, Francisco, N+1 Cyclery, and I got to spend a day working in his repair shop with him and working alongside him. And it was a fantastic, I owned a store once, but here I am working with another. It was a fantastic experience that I would have paid for. So we forget how amazing what we do is every day, and that opportunity that we can create these moments for people to become, part of what we're doing. We asked, this will maybe a little bit sad, but we did ask this question, all cyclists self-awareness. We have a couple slides just based on asking them questions about themselves, asking them to rate 1 through 5, to what extent do they agree with the following? And we asked them, overall, I'd say I'm very happy. And to be honest, the answers we got didn't go over that number 4 number. It was 3 points. That's sad. So if anything, we have an opportunity for everyone who comes in our store to help them find some happiness and some joy. Keith, why do we include those self-awareness questions? I was wondering that. I mean, besides that jumped out at me.
No, it's interesting. Well, it's all to look through when we're looking at messages that would resonate with each of the segments. So anything that goes towards things like that, you could mark it in terms of saying, market the health benefits and the mental benefits, mental well-being of cycling. So that's important, in the same way that one of the questions talks about sustainability and protecting the environment. Interestingly, the core cyclists were more interested in sustainability than some of the other groups. So that's the reason we stack all of those up. Yeah, some of them may not be directly relevant straight away, but it's when we're thinking about how to market to these people that's why we put in those sort of questions.
I think along those same lines, just one other thing to emphasize. The whole of the channel of trade, bicycle shops need to do in my view, much better job of both welcoming and marketing to women. When you look at the data, it makes it, to me, abundantly clear that we're still doing a poor job relative to women, both from an employment standpoint and from the standpoint of making women feel comfortable when they come into a bike shop environment. We've become softer, but not to the point where we even approach 50% of women as riders and as our customers. And I think that outreach starts with the brands. And I can be harsh here. I don't think a dealer should do business with any brand that is whitewashing the issues and being disrespectful, because many of them are in their advertising and their approach. And I think it's time to end that, quite frankly. And I'm not interested in the platitudes, because to me, shops cannot explain to me any piece of disrespect for any, particularly the women's side of the market, but for anybody that represents a customer going forward in this market. We can't afford to do that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. We had another question come in. Are there any numbers of doorstep cyclists versus cyclists who transport their bikes to a riding location? Did we ask anything?
No, unfortunately. Need to add that next time around.
Yeah, we asked a lot of questions. That one didn't get in.
Any other questions that are coming in? I love the feedback that's coming into the chat, and I love how Cisco, said he objects, and he said that teach a man to fish and he'll never get hungry again. So we do know that every retailer has a diverse, whatever works for you. This is just ideas and thoughts, and happy birthday, Cisco, as well. Any other questions for our experts here today? I
do note that Cisco's picture is right there in my screen. He's just below you. Yeah, there he goes. Yeah. Hey, Cisco.
So Keith, I know that you do reports for many different industries outside of ours. The bicycle industry, anything that was, I don't know, I already asked you anything that stood out, but any takeaways, I think, just in general overall that you notice, just for future thinking, that would help retailers leaving?
No, I think we work with like a number of different retailers, and we really the difference between, say, our tennis retailers and the running retailers are probably most like your typical cycling store. The tennis retailers, if they're off site, they can't invite people to the store to play tennis. They can't invite, so they really can't do a lot about advocacy. Whereas running stores, cycling stores, they can organize events, they can advocate for cycling paths, running paths. So that gives you a really good, come to the store for a bike ride followed by a beer. The sort of things that a lot of our running retailers do obviously applies directly to cycling retailers as well. So I think that actually is just a key part, and I'm sure the retailers on the call are already involved in that and are doing that, but it gives them an advantage compared to some of our other retailers like our tennis and our surf skate retailers.
Thank you, Keith.
You can't invite people to a store to go surfing. I mean, you can meet at the beach, but it's not getting them in the store if you're doing that. Right.
Right. And Jay, you've been so great fielding the questions that have come in on the data. And, I appreciate, and, your work with NBDA is fantastic. So if any retailers on this webinar or that are watching the recording have any additional questions for Jay or us around the research, please send them and we will do our best to answer them as thoroughly as possible. The recording will be available tomorrow if you want to come back to it. Jay, any final takeaways that you want to leave our listeners with?
Just that for retailers, this is important work. It is meaningful. It's actionable. The NBDA is making a consolidated, concise version of all this data available to you at a bargain basement price at $3.99 for the NBDA member, $6.99 for the dealers and retailers that are not NBDA members. Be aware, a supplier is gladly paying $5,000 for this report. And while we can't give you all that information at $3.99, we try to boil it down and provide strategic information, pointers, suggestions, tips, and as Heather said, we will answer your questions. Once you're looking at the data and you got questions about it, ask us. And we'll do our absolute best to make sure we provide thorough answers for you that are actionable for your business.
Yeah, the undertaking of this project was not entered into lightly. It was a very costly project that the NBDA took on in partnership with brands like Bosch and SRAM and Specialized. And, there's been a lot of news recently out there about some major brands, making major changes. But the information and the investment into this does indicate that the brands in our community at large, our industry community at large, wants to and needs to know who these future consumers are, so we can make products and marketing and best position to help retailers, help the industry at large, be able to succeed and grow. So this is really good information. And we appreciate you taking the time to join us today and learn. And if you'd like any more specifics, any more questions, please reach out. We're happy, to answer them to the best we can. We want everyone to have this information. It's critical to your planning, and we want you to be best prepared to use it as well. So if you haven't seen those 3 prior webinars that Jay put together with us, please go reference them. They're on our YouTube channel. There's some great information in there that everyone really needs to review and have access to make the best decisions for your retail environment moving forward. Keith and Jay, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thanks for
enjoyed it. Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Be well.
Bye.